Victor Steele's home had a strangely oppressive atmosphere, even though the warm golden glow of New York's streetlights outside invited everyone to enjoy a peaceful evening. However, inside Victor's large kitchen, his wife, Clara, was not there. She sat at the dining table with a half-full glass of red wine in her hand, and her eyes were distant but resolute. A thick stack of documents lay on the table in front of her, the bold old-heading divorce agreement glaring at Victor like a silent declaration that everything was about to change forever. Victor stood across from her, still clutching the leather jacket he had just taken off after a long day at the office, his heart pounding in his chest not from work fatigue, but rather from the strange tension that clung to the air like a heavy fog. She just sat there, her face calm and detached like a finely carved statue, without asking him about his day or giving him the gentle smile he had come to love. Then she looked up, her eyes meeting his with such intensity that he gasped. "Catch Victor," Clara said, in an eerily quiet voice, as if she were trying desperately to hold back feelings that threatened to explode. "We must speak," Victor said, freezing the smile he was about to give in a weak attempt to break the stifling stillness. "What's wrong, honey?" "I don't even know where to start," she said, her eyes briefly averting his before returning with a renewed resolve. "But I can't keep doing this anymore." "Did something happen?" He sat down carefully, trying to keep his composure, but a dreadful feeling of dread began to rise deep inside his chest. Clara set her wine glass down on the table, the faint clink of glass against wood echoing through the still room. "Clara, what are you saying?" The world seemed to stop, and Victor sat still, staring at the woman he had loved for 15 years. Her words sliced through him like a razor-sharp sword, each syllable inflicting a deeper pain. "I want a divorce." "I've tried, Victor, I really have," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly but her eyes remaining firm. "But I don't love you anymore, and I've met someone else." Victor's hands clenched the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles turned white, and his voice grew louder, unable to contain the tidal wave of anger and despair crashing within him. Clara didn't flinch. Instead, she held his gaze as if the truth was her only escape. "Ethan. He works with me. Victor, he gives me life." "Ethan, Clara, this must be a joke. After everything we've been through, after all these years of marriage, you're just throwing it all away." Victor sprang to his feet, the chair scraping loudly against the floor and crashing down with a sharp thud. His eyes burned with a mixture of pain and betrayal. Clara stayed seated, though her eyes now glistened with tears. "I'm sorry, but we both know it's been a long time since things felt right between us. I don't want to live a life without love anymore. I've made my decision." Victor stared at the woman he had once considered his entire world. The air in the room felt so heavy he could hardly breathe. He couldn't say anything more, couldn't bring himself to utter word. He simply stood there staring at Clara, as if hoping to wake up from this nightmare, but no matter how long he looked, the reality remained unyielding. Something inside him shattered, and he knew this was only the beginning of a torment he couldn't easily escape. Later that night, Victor sat silently on the living room couch, a glass of whiskey in his hand that he hadn't taken a sip from. His eyes were fixed on the family photo hanging on the wall in the picture. Clara stood in the center, her radiant smile as bright as the morning sun, one hand resting on Victor's shoulder, the other cradling their daughter Lily, who had been only 8 years old then. Their life back then had been filled with laughter and love. Or so it seemed. As the memory resurfaced, Victor felt a sharp ache in his chest. He struggled to comprehend how a love that once burned so brightly could have dimmed without him. Noticing, Victor vividly remembered the first time he met Clara at an art exhibition in the heart of the city. She wasn't just beautiful, she was sharp with bright, sparkling eyes that radiated curiosity about the world. They talked all evening over glasses of wine, delving into conversations about art, films, and their grand dreams. Clara spoke passionately about her aspirations of becoming an event manager, while Victor, a young artist struggling to find his place, laughed and said his dream was to paint the entire world. That night, he realized his heart belonged to her. They fell in love without hesitation. Every date was an adventure, strolling through Central Park, sharing pizza on Victor's rooftop, or spending endless afternoons with her giggling at his jokes as he painted. Clara was his biggest cheerleader, the first person to believe he could achieve anything. With her unwavering support, propelled Victor to success. He began securing major contracts, and his work was soon displayed in galleries across the city. The early years of their marriage were the most beautiful years of Victor's life. He vividly recalled the night. They moved into their first home, the one they had dreamed of for so long. They sat in the empty living room, eating pizza straight from the box, and drinking wine out of plastic cups, laughing uncontrollably at their own silliness that night. Clara looked at him with eyes shimmering with pride and whispered, "We're going to make this the coziest home in the world." And they did. The arrival of Lily brought their family even closer. Victor would never forget the day. Clara placed baby Lily in his arms, her face glowing with both exhaustion and joy. "This little girl is the best thing we've ever created," Clara whispered. And Victor believed it with all his heart. The years that followed were filled with love, laughter, and shared dreams, beach vacations, family game nights in the living room, and stolen moments of intimacy between Victor and Clara painted a picture of happiness he thought would last forever. But life's demands began to creep in, pulling them into separate orbits. Victor became busier with large-scale projects at work, while Clara climbed the ranks in her career as an event manager. The evenings they once spent talking at the dinner table grew fewer, replaced by work emails and endless phone calls. The words "I love you" were still spoken, but they carried less weight. Becoming more routine than heartfelt, Victor convinced himself it was just temporary stress. Something they would overcome all the challenges. Before, what he didn't realize was that Clara's feelings of emptiness had been quietly growing each time he missed an important event, or forgot the small but meaningful gestures that once mattered so much to her. Clara felt increasingly left behind in the void left by Victor's absence. Ethan entered her life. A young, confident man who had a way of making her feel significant again that changed everything. Victor set the whiskey glass down on the table, the cold surface pressing against his palm like the weight of his guilt. The past played out vividly in his mind like a film, rewinding to the moments of happiness he had taken for granted. He struggled to comprehend how the love he had poured his heart and soul had fractured. Was it his fault or Clara's? Or perhaps, like everything else in life, love needed constant nurturing to thrive and not fade away. The room fell into an eerie silence, closing his eyes. Victor inhaled deeply, aware that time could not be reversed, yet he struggled to navigate the engulfing silence that threatened to overwhelm him. Ethan had entered Clara's life like a cool breeze on a sweltering day. It was during a major corporate conference where Clara was tasked with organizing the entire event. Ethan, the keynote speaker, was a young, charismatic man with a confident smile and a deep, resonant voice that could easily charm anyone. From the first moment they met, he made Clara feel noticed. A feeling she hadn't experienced from Victor in what felt like ages. Their first conversation left her laughing at his clever jokes, his charm effortlessly breaking through her usual professionalism. Ethan's gaze held hers in a way that made her feel special, valued, and loved. The way she had once dreamed Victor would always look at her when he praised her event planning. Calling her the powerhouse behind every success, Clara couldn't suppress the flutter of excitement in her chest. Ethan was youthful, polished, and magnetic, the complete opposite of Victor, who had become too familiar and, at times, too distant. It all began with harmless conversations. Clara and Ethan exchanged emails about work, but soon the emails took a more personal tone, with questions like "How was your weekend?" and "What do you enjoy doing in your free time?" began to pop up, and Clara found herself eagerly awaiting his messages. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of youthful excitement, the kind that made her heart race every time her phone pinged with the notification from him. The meeting outside of work happened late one evening after hours. Ethan casually suggested they grab a drink, saying, "You've been working so hard all day. You deserve to unwind a little." They sat together in a small, dimly lit bar in the middle of the city, where the soft glow of lights and the gentle hum of jazz music created an atmosphere of intimacy she hadn't felt in years. Throughout the evening, Ethan showered Clara with compliments, telling her that she was smarter, more observant, and more extraordinary than anyone he had ever met. Clara knew his words might be empty flattery, but she couldn't deny how they made her feel noticed, appreciated, and cherished. When he reached across the table and lightly touched her hand, she didn't pull away. Instead, she felt as if a part of her long dormant had been reignited after years of being lost in darkness. From that moment, their relationship progressed faster than Clara had anticipated. Secret meetings after work, late-night texts are stretching into the early hours of this morning. Ethan made her feel young, free, and desirable. Feelings she hadn't experienced in her marriage with Victor for a long time while Victor buried himself in his work, oblivious to Clara's growing distance from Ethan, which was always present, always ready to give her the attention and time she craved. Clara knew she was treading dangerous ground, but she didn't stop. A part of her justified her actions by blaming Victor's negligence, the late nights he spent at the office, the anniversaries he forgot, each became a reason. Clara used to convince herself that she deserved the care and affection. Ethan offered. It all came to a head one evening, when Ethan invited Clara to his apartment. For the first time she felt the weight of crossing an irreversible line. Ethan's apartment was small but cozy. Bathed in the warm glow of soft lighting and the subtle scent of cedar wood, he had prepared a simple dinner, but it wasn't the food or the atmosphere that captivated Clara. It was the way Ethan looked at her. His gaze said she was the only woman in the world. And it made her forget everything else when Ethan placed his hand on her cheek, his eyes searching hers for permission. Clara didn't resist in that moment. Every thought of Victor, Lily, and her family vanished. All that remained was the feeling of being wanted, being loved in a way she hadn't felt in years. But even as they fell into each other's arms, a part of Clara couldn't silence the guilt goring at her. Images of Victor and Lily flickered through her mind unbidden. Clara told herself this would be the only time that she could stop before things spiraled out of control. But deep down she knew she had already crossed a boundary she could never undo. And she couldn't have imagined that this single act would ignite a chain of events filled with tragedy and heartbreak. Victor sat frozen in his home office, his phone glowing in the dim light. The messages he had just discovered felt like daggers stabbing into his chest. Each word was like a cruel revelation of the sweet nothings, the promises exchanged between Ethan and Clara, and the most gut-wrenching of all, Clara's enthusiastic replies, filled with a passion Victor couldn't remember seeing from her in years. "Clara, I can't wait any longer. I want us to be together and put a stop to this." Clara's answer to Ethan's message, which was delivered with harsh candor, broke him. "Soon I can't bear this anymore either." Victor let the phone slip from his hands, his trembling fingers unable to hold on. His mind spun wildly, a storm of exhaustion, anger, and unbearable pain surging through him. He tried to breathe to calm himself, but it was futile. Images of Clara and Ethan flooded his thoughts, her distant eyes and her cold demeanor, over the past months now making cruel since he had been blind. Too consumed by work, too naively confident in the illusion that his family was intact, that his marriage still had love. That night, Victor decided to confront the truth head-on. He stepped into the living room, where Clara sat reading, her hair cascading over her shoulder, a sight that once brought him peace and comfort. But now, to Victor, it was nothing more than a facade. Clara glanced up, as he entered, immediately sensing the storm brewing behind his expression. "Victor, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice tinged with nervousness, though she tried to maintain a calm exterior. He stared at her unflinching, his voice steady, but weighted with resolve. "Clara, you're cheating on me, aren't you, with Ethan?" The directness of his question hit like a punch, leaving Clara momentarily frozen. The book in her hand slipped to the floor, and panic flashed across her face before she quickly tried to mask it. "Victor, what are you talking about? Don't lie to me anymore. I don't comprehend." "I've read all of the damning texts between her and Ethan," Victor said in a quiet voice, but each word sank deeply into the stillness before he threw his phone on the table. "Clara, do you have anything left to deny?" Clara's eyes fell to the phone, her lips pressing into a thin line. The silence that followed was sharp and unbearable, cutting through the space between them like a blade. Eventually, she took a deep breath, her eyes brimming with tears. "Victor, I'm sorry, I didn't want you to find out like this, but yes, I've been having an affair." Her confession landed like a final blow, confirming every fear and suspicion Victor had tried to ignore. He laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and full of despair. "That's what you regret, Clara." Her voice trembled as she tried to respond, but Victor raised his hand, stopping her. The damage was done, and no apology could undo it. Clara lowered her head, tears streaming down her cheeks, saying, "I never meant to hurt you, but we're not the same anymore." Victor drew back as though he needed physical separation to prevent her words from strangling him. "But what about Lily, Clara? Ethan makes me feel cherished, and I feel so alone. When she finds out that her mother left her family for another guy, how would she feel? What about the years we shared together? Do they mean nothing to you?" Clara choked back a sob, her eyes filled with despair. "Victor, I tried. I really did, but I can't keep living a life where I'm not happy. I've wanted to tell you for so long, but I didn't know how to start. Victor felt like he was sinking into darkness. Everything he had built, everything he had believed in now lay in ruins. But beyond the anger and heartbreak, he felt an emptiness. A hollow void. There was nothing left to say. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving Clara to cry alone that night. Victor didn't sleep. He sat in his home office, staring at an unfinished painting on the easel. The brushstrokes seemed lifeless, a reflection of his current state. He knew this wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of the man he once was, but amidst the pain, a faint spark flickered in his mind, a realization that he had to rise again. Not for Clara, but for himself, for Lily, for what little he still had left. But to do that he needed to let everything fall apart completely, before rebuilding that night. Victor made a decision. His life would be reborn from the ashes. Clara had left behind. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating the bright, vibrant space of Isabel Hart's art gallery. Victor stood before the largest painting he had ever created, a masterpiece of vivid colors. Imbued with a profound sadness in the painting, a phoenix stretched its wings wide, rising triumphantly from a bed of ashes, its feathers a radiant mix of fiery reds and golds. Izzy smiled and put a gentle hand on his arm. "Victor, you know," she said softly, her voice like a familiar melody, "this painting isn't just yours. It belongs to everyone who has faced heartbreak, but has had the courage to get back up and keep going." Victor turned to her, his eyes filled with pain, now holding a rare piece. This wasn't just Victor's masterpiece, it was a symbol of his new life, one he had painstakingly rebuilt after the storm of his broken marriage. Izzy smiled but said nothing since she didn't have to. They both understood each other without using words since the day Clara left his life. "You didn't just help me stand again, you also drew me out of the darkness." When Clara vanished from their lives, Ethan's facade of heroism also fell apart after she took her share of the divorce settlement. Ethan exposed his true self as a con artist, leaving Clara drowning in the debts he had created, alone and desperate. Izzy had been there, but she was more than just a friend. She was the one who encouraged Victor to pick up his brushes again, to find himself in each stroke of color and canvas. Their late-night conversations, sharing old memories, dreams, and fears, became the basis of a bond that grew organically like a flower blooming in barren soil. Victor didn't answer, but when Izzy and Lily urged him to, he decided to meet her for the first time in a year. They sat across from each other in a little cafe close to his house, and Clara wasn't the confident woman she had been when she left him. Instead, she appeared exhausted and defeated. "I don't expect you to forgive me, I just want you to know how sorry I am for destroying everything we had." Victor looked at her, no longer feeling angry or resentful, only calmed. He had moved past the pain. "Clara," he said, his voice steady and warm. Her eyes were heavy with regret. "I loved you once, and I'll never deny that, but you need to understand I can't go back. I found a new life, and you need to find your own path too." Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. She knew this was the true end, but also the chance to start over. As Victor stood and left the cafe, he didn't look back. He felt lighter, as though he had finally closed the last door to his past. A month later, Victor and Izzy hosted the opening night of their new gallery that evening. Amidst the crowd and the glow of success, Victor unexpectedly knelt before Izzy, surrounded by the paintings they had built their dreams upon. "Isabel Hart," he began, his voice trembling with emotion, "you've shown me that love can be reborn from the ruins. Will you marry me?" The room fell silent, as Izzy's radiant smile broke through tears shimmering in her eyes under the gallery lights. "Victor Steele." She replied, to her voice steady, but full of warmth, "I'll stand by you through every fire life throws at us. Yes, I'll marry you." Applause erupted, filling the space like a symphony of joy. Lily was the first to rush forward, throwing her arms around them both. To her, this wasn't just the rebirth of her father. It was the creation of a new family she had come to love and cherish. 3 years later, Victor stood on a serene beach, the golden sunlight reflecting off the waves. Izzy was beside him, holding their newborn son in her arms a short distance away. Lily, now grown, she sat watching them with a soft smile as Victor looked out at the horizon, the warmth of Izzy's hand in his and the laughter of his children surrounding him. He felt the profound truth he had fought to reach from ashes. Life had not only risen again, it had flourished, and as the sun set, painting the sky with brilliant colors, Victor smiled, knowing this was the beginning of the most beautiful chapter of his life. The applause filled the gallery like a symphony of happiness. And Lily was the first to run forward, wrapping her arms tightly around both Victor and Izzy. To her, this wasn't just the rebirth of her father. It was the creation of a new family, one she cherished more than anything in the world. 3 years later, on a cool evening, Victor stood by the shore, the ocean breeze tousling his hair as the waves lapped gently at the sand beside him. Was Izzy holding their newborn son, his tiny hands curling around hers a short distance away. Lily now, a young woman, sat on a weathered log, watching her father playfully laugh and toss pebbles into the waves. With her little brother, the joy on Victor's face was unmistakable. His laughter, carrying over the soft roar of the ocean life, had taken Victor through the deepest sorrows, breaking him in ways he never thought possible. But it had also shown that, even from the ashes of despair, happiness could find its way back, blooming in unexpected and beautiful forms. As he looked out toward the horizon, where the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, he felt a profound peace settle over him. This was more than the end of pain. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. As the colors of the sunset stretched across the sky, Victor smiled, knowing with absolute certainty that this was the start of the most beautiful chapter of his life.